Hello, love. I'm Ashley Miley, and this is the Sacred Intimacy Temple, a podcast exploring love, sex, and relationships as a sacred spiritual path. Each episode is a remembrance of sacred intimacy, first with yourself, and then with Source, your beloved, family, and community. Come home to the temple within. Let's begin. Hello, beloved. Welcome back to the Sacred Intimacy Temple podcast. And welcome back also as well to the binge series, Coming Home to Intimacy. So we are about halfway through this series, and we're now really going to be exploring some of the unique kind of pockets of work that are within the path of sacred intimacy. And as I had spoken to a little bit earlier in the series, one of the first sort of like thresholds that we really need to cross is the body. Coming back to the body. And so before I even dive into any sort of information, if you will, or thoughts or whatever you want to call it, I actually just want to invite you to come into your body in this moment. You might be listening to this as you walk or you drive or you're doing the dishes or folding clothes. I don't know what you do with your lives, but take a moment to just come into your body. And even coming into your body can be something as simple as just noticing something like your clothes. For example, you can't see them, but I am wearing the coziest pants in the entire world right now. They're this olive green, these wide-legged pants I got from Aries on sale, which made it even better. They have these awesome pockets, and I'm obsessed with these pants. They're way better than sweatpants in a way, and you can wear them in public and look really cute. So even for me in this moment, I'm just noticing these pants in my body, and that is bringing me back into my body. So maybe noticing a detail like that. Maybe you can even notice just the weight, like gravity on your shoulders. And maybe that feels really heavy and it's not a desirable or pleasurable thing to notice, but even just notice that. Maybe noticing your breath. Taking a moment to notice, where does your breath live in your body right now? Maybe it's within your chest. Maybe you're able to breathe into your lower belly. And I just want to say, as we notice these things, you may also notice judgment, criticism, concern. Maybe there's oh, I gotta fix this. Oh, there I go again. Breathing in a certain way, or my body feels uncomfortable in a certain way. And I just want to say, you don't need to fix or change anything right now. We're just noticing. And I'll invite you now to just bring yourself a little bit out of that noticing, but keeping some level of awareness on your body. And what I think is important to first say is that I think you've probably catched the drift a bit thus far, but in order to have deeper intimacy with anyone, even with aspects of our life, we have to come back to ourselves first. And for many of us, we can even map that almost as a journey from living only in our heads and coming back to our bodies, because in the world as we are right now, although it is shifting, and I have a lot of gratitude for that, there's still a lot of us that are disconnected from our bodies. And coming back into your body doesn't have to be this crazy, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, journey, although at times it is. And if you've gone through a lot of trauma that has disconnected you from your body, there are definitely times where it feels that way. But as we just experienced, or potentially experienced, I should say, coming back to the body is simply just noticing. like bringing your awareness, bringing your attention, bringing your focus, your presence to your body. And honestly, the deeper journey of returning to the body is a lot more about these small steps, you know? So much of the time in healing ourselves or on a spiritual journey or whatever you want to call it, we are like, I got to do this big thing. I got to take this leap, like, and, or like, I went on this retreat and I had this huge transformation. And the thing is, like, when you're focused on what I'm going to call the big leaps, for lack of a better term, they become kind of unsustainable. We can't just be leaping all the time in our lives. We just don't have that in our world currently. Some of us maybe, and if that's you, I am really happy for you. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of how you sustain that kind of level of change and discomfort and whatever else. But for most of us, I actually find that what I would call, again, like the big leaps are really this like collection of small steps. And so you don't just like come back to your body because you do some sort of deep journey, although that can be quite an initiatory threshold to cross. That really does like, oh, I'm in a body. Whoa, cool. But to sustain that awareness, to sustain that information, if you will, and that knowing, it's these small little steps, these small steps of noticing my breath, noticing how I can feel clothes on my body. And from that layer, we can go deeper. We can notice the thoughts, the beliefs that we have that are often running our lives. We can notice parts of ourselves. We can notice emotions. We can notice sensations. And after you even get sort of familiar with that terrain, you can just kind of say, fuck all that. And it's just like, what's here right now? And I don't need to know where it's from. I don't need to connect it to this childhood trauma. I don't need to label it. It's just like, what's actually the thing that's moving through you? What is the energy, the impulse that's moving through you? And it doesn't really matter where it's from or why it's there or what, it's just about actually being in the body and with it. And when we're talking about intimacy, there's many reasons why we have to start with the body, but to maybe name something that's a bit obvious, I hope, is we only experience intimacy through our bodies. Intimacy is not so much a phenomenon that we experience, if you will, through our heads. We can definitely have intellectual attraction. We can have like love, the intellectualizing with other humans. And that can bring us a lot of pleasure, a lot of joy, a lot of connection. But at the same time, like the experience of that is actually in our bodies. And, when you think about really beautiful, intimate moments, maybe it's like a sexual experience. Maybe it's a moment where you and a partner or you and a friend worked through conflict and it led to a deeper understanding, greater compassion, more empathy, more awareness of each other and like the terrains that you walk through together. That sense of connection, that sense of closeness, that sense of I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and you as well to me, like that's in our bodies. And the only way that we can experience deeper intimacy is to actually be more attuned to our bodies and to be able to like receive those experiences and also share those experiences. But as I've alluded to earlier in this series, and as you'll hear me say probably a lot, there's a lot of ways that we become disconnected from our bodies. And in that, we do become disconnected from a certain level of intimacy or a deeper experience of intimacy. And so it's very important that we come back to the body, that we're willing to engage in that, even though it can be uncomfortable, even though it can be scary. And as someone who had lived dissociated from my body for most of my life, I would say I came back into my body when I was 23 and I'm 31 now. So I've had some time back in my body. And even in that, it wasn't until like 28 that I really started to deeply be in the body again. There was some other pieces before that that kind of helped usher that. but the capacity to be with the body and to stay with the body, and especially the larger, more uncomfortable pieces of being in the body for me. And I will say this, like, I had, like, coming back into my body, I did not realize that I was actually disconnected from my body. But there are these two moments I think of. There is this one therapy session I had once where my therapist, she was like, I just want to invite you to like feel your feet on the ground right now. And her and I, we did not have a great relationship. And the way that she invited me into it wasn't great. It came with a lot of judgment, it felt like. And I remember just screaming at her. I was like, I'm so broken. I need to be fixed. You're telling me to feel my fucking feet on the ground. Like, what is this going to do for me? I just need you to fix me. And I'm just yelling at her. God bless that woman's soul. And, you know, I didn't realize it at the time, but I didn't actually, in that moment, like, part of the reason that I, like, started to, like, emote in that way and express in that way was because I genuinely, I didn't have actual cognitive or, like, conscious awareness of my body. Like, to me, being in my head was being in my body. And I was telling her what was going on in my body, which at that moment in time was just honestly a lot of thoughts and a lot of beliefs. And I felt like she, you know, it doesn't really matter. But I remember that moment. And then, you know, fast forward like a year or two later, I was in this container and we were doing sort of like emotional releasing meditation. And this was sort of my first experience into meditation. This was kind of my first exposure into all that. And I just remember when I started doing these meditations, like I would just start sobbing. Like it would be like 2 seconds in and I'm just sobbing to death. And all this like shaking and all this energy that's happening in my body. And I didn't know what was going on. It was just very overwhelming. And there became a certain, like a certain time where I was doing that meditation where like all of a sudden it's like lights turned on and I felt my lower body for the first time. Like I had this cognitive, conscious, like, holy shit, like those are my legs. And like, oh my God, those are my feet. I can feel my toes. And it was only in that moment that I had realized that for that time, you know, for those 23 years, give or take, however long, like I could not feel my lower body. I had no awareness. And it became fascinating to me after that moment of like walking around in the world and having awareness for the first time of feeling my feet on the ground. And I know it sounds kind of stupid and kind of like, all right, like feeling your feet on the ground, whatever. But I can't even express in words like how like awakening in a way that was, how illuminating that was to me. And just like a level of like gratitude for something as simple as like being able to feel my feet on the ground, because again, it made me realize the years of not feeling that. And from that, that's where it's like, oh, there's a lot of emotions. Oh, there's a lot of stuff in my body that needs to be felt and processed. And so when we're disconnected from our bodies, even at the point, even to a degree of dissociation, often most of us are going through the world, things are happening, we have these emotions, we have these thoughts, whatever is happening. And because we're not taught about our nervous system, we're not taught about the body, we're not taught about regulation, we don't have space for that, we don't exist in the pacing for that. We are just like, shit, I feel this way, this is inconvenient, don't have time for this, gotta go do, achieve, whatever, da 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 da. Let me just stuff this down. And so we just stuff and stuff and stuff and stuff. And this is where we have these like incomplete cycles in our bodies. Like we have this like grief from this thing that happened in our childhood that we've never felt. And it's just almost like this wave at its peak, frozen in our bodies. And you do that, like you collect enough of those that at some point your body is just kind of inundated with stuff to feel. And it starts, at some point, it has to kind of complete and move itself in some way. So it starts coming out sideways, which is where it's like we have these emotional outbursts. We become easily overwhelmed. And I remember this a lot as a kid, like more in my teenage years, where it's like, I don't even know what would really be the thing to provoke it. But all of a sudden I could be fine. And 2 seconds later, I am sobbing and overwhelmed and panicking. And in some ways it's because, you know, something happened. It reminded me of all these things I hadn't felt. All those things come to the surface on top of whatever emotions there. Had no ability to hold any of that. And so I'm just kind of like spurring out emotions and things like that, and being overwhelmed by that, and in ways kind of looping in that and not being able to kind of complete what was unfelt, complete that incomplete cycle, and then being able to kind of come back into a regulated state. And so, like, how moving through the world with like all these unfelt things affects us and how it affects our relationships is one, like, if we're not in our bodies and intimacy really does happen in our bodies, we can't experience it. So, even if there is someone who is across from us who loves us and supports us, if we're not in our bodies, we might be able to, like, in an intellectual, cognitive way, like, recognize, hey, this person cares about me. Hey, they love me. Hey, they're here for me. But we're not really like receiving it in our bodies. And so it really limits the depth that we can experience connection with. And I think some of us, that's kind of where our journey with our body is, where it's just like, we're not experiencing the depth of connection and intimacy that's actually available to us because we can't really receive it in a way. And even like we can't express what we might be feeling. We might not even be aware that we're feeling those deeper levels and then know how to express that to another person. But if you might be on more of an extreme side of this experience of like trauma and being dissociated and all that and having all this unfelt stuff, there's just like no space for anything else but our emotions or our unfelt things or our wounds or traumas, whatever. And often, again, like when we're in relationship and we're getting triggered and we're not aware that we're triggered, we're not aware how to hold that, we often then project it onto the other person. And that's where we can get into very like harmful dynamics with other people, where it's like we're trying to make this person act in a certain way. We're trying to control them. We're trying to manipulate them so that they're kind of in this status that does not trigger us so that all these emotions don't come up. Or it's even like we're the one who's spurring out emotions. And I've been one to do this in relationship where it's like I'm spurring out all these emotions. I'm dumping all over you. And it's understandable that the other person is overwhelmed by that. They do not know what to do with that. That's triggering stuff up in their own body. And we have to pull away from each other. We have to break connection because it's too much to be in connection when you're kind of like tsunamiing in that sort of way, for lack of a better term. And again, like that makes it really hard to even just have connection, let alone go to deeper levels of connection. And also, like all that, even to be said, like if we're holding a lot of pain in our body, a lot of unfelt things, often being in our body feels unsafe. And so then being in the presence of others where maybe they're able to actually like support and love you in a way that you haven't felt before and that feels unsafe, we sabotage that. If someone has a lot of emotion and they don't know how to like hold that and work with that, and we're projecting it onto other people, that can feel unsafe for the person receiving it as well as the person who's like kind of spurring everything out. And so it's like we don't even feel safe, and we really can't experience connection and intimacy if we don't have this kind of baseline of safety. And that baseline of safety isn't in another person, isn't in an entity. It really is within ourselves first and foremost. And so there's a sense of safety that has to be regained by coming back to the body. Like we come back to the body and that kind of, we can over time reset that sort of foundational line of safety within ourselves. And really from that place, we can begin to move in relationship in a different way, and our capacity to connect deeper and to have greater intimacy kind of expands. But even that, like it's a process over time. And so, yeah, like coming to the body, coming back to it, being in that journey is a journey. It's a lifelong journey, I really think. And there's so many layers to it. But for me, what I've found as I've like come back to my body, there's really been kind of like two bodies of work that I think that when you put them together, they really create this like harmonized union, for lack of better term, of how we move through the world with our body and how we're in intimacy with our body. One of them would be like somatic work. And the somatic work is really about this ability to sort of track what's going on in our body and being able to just be with it and stay with it and notice it, just like we were doing at the beginning of this episode. being able to like notice, like, where is my breath right now? Even like, is my awareness like actually in my own body, or is it like over there focused on something else or someone else? Somatics is also being able to sort of track, like, wow, I just had this conversation with someone. Now I'm feeling this sense of tension in my body. I'm feeling this like heaviness on my chest. Oh, I wonder if I'm triggered. Or even like, wow, I don't feel anything. I feel like I'm trying to get out of my body. Maybe I've actually moved into such a deep state of like freeze or dissociation. And being able to sort of track these things and being able to stay with that experience long enough that we can sort of move up in terms of regulation, going from dysregulated to regulated. And a lot of times we're living chronically in dysregulation in our lives, which then means we're creating and being in relationship from dysregulation. And like, dysregulation is where we're going to be really playing out these harmful patterns and establishing sort of these harmful ways that we relate. And when we're talking about safety, deeper intimacy, resolving conflict, even just being able to reveal more, to be more vulnerable, it really does require us to be more in a regulated state. It doesn't mean that we can't be in relationship when we're dysregulated, because it's a natural flow. Like, we're going to move from dysregulation to regulation and regulation to dysregulation. But what I think becomes really important of how we navigate relationship, and let's even just think about conflict, for example. Conflict often is we might have been regulated, or we might have come into a moment dysregulated, which is what caused the conflict. But usually on the other side of conflict, both people to some degree are dysregulated. When you're dysregulated, you do not have access to your ability to problem solve, to be creative, to be innovative, to be empathetic, to be compassionate. And these things are needed to be able to really move through repair and to be able to go to the other side of conflict. And so when you've had a moment of conflict, it can be very important, for example, that you can acknowledge first and foremost, hey, I'm dysregulated right now. And I think in order for us to find the other side of this conflict, we're going to have to be regulated. You need to know, one, I'm dysregulated and have a capacity to name that. Two, to know what you need in dysregulation. So for some people, when they're dysregulated, and I'm thinking about anxious and avoidant dynamics, for example, if you're in conflict, you're both dysregulated, one of you is anxious, one of you is avoidant. The anxious person often needs connection. They need assurance. The avoidant person needs space. Neither of these are wrong or bad. That's just kind of where we are. And so in that, to even then go into a space where it's like, I'm going to actually take a moment to re-regulate myself, whatever that looks like. The avoidant person needs to communicate to the anxious person, hey, I need space right now to be able to re-regulate myself. I'm going to come back to you later this evening in a couple of hours, or come back to you tomorrow morning. I'll check in with you and we can set up a time to talk, whatever it might be. The anxious person, needs to be able to give that person the avoidant space, but they also need to know, I need connection right now. I might have verbally been able to kind of get connection from my partner before we moved away, but I also need to know, like, how do I create connection with myself, or how do I receive that connection that I need right now, maybe somewhere else, to help me regulate? And from an awareness of I'm dysregulated, this is what I need when I'm dysregulated, then moving into a state of you go and do, you meet your needs, you re-regulate yourself, you self-soothe. And from there, in that space, we can then resolve conflict. And in that way, when we're able to be aware of, when we're able to communicate to some degree, when we're able to meet our own needs, that's where this dance between the natural occurrence of regulation to dysregulation and dysregulation to regulation can occur in relationship. And again, actually, for example, when we're in a conflict, we've become dysregulated, we've taken space, we've been able to re-regulate, and we're in a regulated state, we're able to come together, we're able to sort of work out the issue, we can actually find greater intimacy on the other side of that. And the only reason is because actually we moved into dysregulation and we rode that wave to its entirety, and that creates deeper connection and intimacy within itself, deeper awareness, deeper understanding, greater empathy, greater compassion, etc. And so somatics to me is really about being connected to the felt sense. It's about being present with ourselves and staying in presence and being in presence with ourselves, being able to just be with our experience, whatever it is. And that goes as much to say as like being with the discomfort and the painful and hard things just as much as it is to be in the pleasurable, good, and joyful things. Some of us are so conditioned and so used to pain, badness, discomfort that it's actually really hard to be present and with joy, pleasure. And if you're talking about, experiencing intimacy from maybe like a lens of sexuality, for example, you really actually have to have a level of capacity for pleasure to be able to hold pleasure, to be able to receive pleasure, to go to deeper places in a sexual sort of moment and have intimacy in that sort of way. The other piece that I think is really important about, coming back to the body and the way that we work with the body over time is like that we bring in this embodiment piece. So in my journey, I actually sort of connected to these bodies of work. I connected to embodiment first, and then I moved into somatics. It's kind of not the best sequencing, but it was very still powerful at the same time. Because embodiment to me is this kind of alchemy experience. So I can know what's going on in my body. I can be able to track, like, I'm connected to this pain from my childhood. It's showing up in my solar plexus and in my chest. I'm breathing with it. I'm being with it. I'm staying with it. I'm remembering my capacity. I remember I'm in a body. That's kind of like somatics. But when we're able to actually tune into that felt sense, maybe it's a part, maybe it's a sensation, maybe it's an emotion, maybe it's a combination of all of them. We're able to tune into that. We then can ask ourselves, like, what does this experience, what does this felt sense in my body need? And oftentimes, what has been unfelt has been unexpressed. And I have found often that in this resolution of taking a complete cycle that's frozen at the top of its peak, at its peak of activation of experience, and to be able to follow it through and complete it, the expression piece is very necessary. And embodiment really supports us in expression. And also like such a unique form of expression that isn't just, let me verbalize to you, let me cognitize with you like what I'm experiencing and what's going on inside my body, but it like lets your brain go and you're fully in your body and you're connected to that sensation, you're connected to that part, that experience, and it's like, how does this want to exist in my body? Is there a way that it wants to move? Like, do I want to like undulate my spine? Is there something that would express the breath? Like through my breath, is it holding my breath? Is it a deeper breath? Is it a shallow, a panicky breath? And what is like the sound that this experience in my body would make? And when we actually like fully go into that felt sense and we go fully into it through embodiment and using our actual body to express what's in our body, there's just this alchemy that occurs. That it's like, that's what actually helps you digest the material that you haven't digested. And when you digest that material, when you complete that incomplete wave through your expression, through your embodiment, when you kind of, again, unionize somatics and embodiment together, you digest, you open up space. And then with this space that's open up in your body, you get to like ask the question of like, what do I want to fill this space with? Maybe often the space in your body has been filled with fear, hopelessness, grief, rage, whatever. And not that those things aren't valid and not that they're not beautiful, because they are. But maybe now your body gets to be filled with pleasure or compassion or love. And then again, like we can use somatics and embodiment to sort of bring in and remember this natural part of you, because all of us have the capacity for the full spectrum of life. We have the full capacity to experience rage and grief and hopelessness and terror just as much as pleasure and joy and love and compassion, whatever it is for you. And oftentimes, because we've existed in so much pain and because we don't know how to digest it in the moment that it's actually moving through our body and it gets stuck in our body for years and all that stuff, we forget, maybe, for example, that we have the capacity to love, to be creative, to be to be expressive. And so we can use somatics and embodiment to then help us remember like what our truth is. And only you know what your truth is. I don't know what it is. But I know for me, for example, there's my trauma deeply made me forget my sexuality, my play, and my softness. And so when I had to come back to my body, I had started, being able to track what was going on in my body, using embodiment to sort of like digest and open up space in my body. Then what started to come through was like, here is this sort of like sexual impulse. Here is this desire to play. Here is this desire to be soft. And to really anchor that energy as I kept seeing those threads keep coming back over and over again, it was kind of like, oh, what does that softness feel like in my body? Where does it live? And then it's like, if I was going to express this, like, how would I move? How would I breathe? How would I sound? You can even take it doesn't always have to be such, embodying something doesn't always have to just be like in the ways that your body expresses, but it's also like, how does this part of me, how does this emotion, how does this energy, how does it want to dress, how does it want to eat, what would it eat, where would it go? All those types of things are ways to embody as well. And so I noticed that, again, like I could use somatics and embodiment to help me remember what was true about myself. And when we have become disconnected from our bodies, we often become disconnected from our truth. And what we end up walking through as the world is a response, in a way, like a protective response to pain and trauma. So, if I was born and I had this natural softness about me, and then I go through trauma, and to protect myself, I learned that I had to be like very intellectual. I had to be very hyper vigilant. I always had to be 10 steps ahead of everyone to stay safe. And that's how I'm moving through the world. Like, that's not actually my truth. We can appreciate and deeply have gratitude for the ways that we learn to protect ourselves through pain, through trauma, all that. But that's not the truth of who we are. And so we get to take what's underneath those protection mechanisms, which is usually the unfelt stuff. We get to feel it and digest it with somatics and embodiment. We open up space. And over time, the impulse of what is true comes through. And then again, we get to use somatics and embodiment. And so it's like for me, when I was sort of walking this part of my journey, let's say with the softness, for example, and I like to tell this story a lot because I think like, again, we think that this healing stuff has to like happen in this very specific container in this very grand way. And it's like, no, it can happen in such small moments of your life. So I did this, year-long masculine cleanse. In that time frame, I did a lot of feeling the old stuff. And then again, these threads of what was true for me came through. Softness was one of them. And so I was sort of in the midst of being in grad school at the time, and I was working at Whole Foods as like my part-time job. I worked in the produce department. So one of the things that I absolutely loved and was super awesome at was stacking apples. I made the most beautiful apple pyramids in the entire world. Like, those pyramids were like, anywho. So, a girl can spend half of her shift at Whole Foods stacking apples and making them look glorious. And so I was connecting to these different pieces, and I had been connecting to them in my own practice space, but I wanted to start playing with like, well, how do I actually like bring this into my everyday life? Because it's beautiful. It can be soft in my practice space, but it's like, if I want to actually be the truth of who I am, like I've got to know how to bring this out into the world. And so it seemed easy to me, like the least risk taking in a way, but still kind of like, whoa, like how's this going to go? Like, to just be stacking the apples, minding my own business, but being like, if I was to embody softness, like, how would I stack the apples today? Sometimes it was like I would just be so granular in like how I would place the apples down. Sometimes it was just keeping an awareness of the front of my body and being like, ooh, like, how can I just like let my breath sort of massage the front of my body to be a little bit softer? Sometimes um, especially if like no one was really around and it wasn't like a time with like lots of customers and stuff, and I was really just in my own space, I might sort of make these like almost like cooing sounds as well. Or um yeah, like there were just different ways I came to sort of express my softness. And then when I felt comfortable with that, I started taking a little bit more risk by like bringing that energy to my coworkers or to customers even, when I like just kind of depending on where I was. And so the softness in that way, I often felt like I was really conveying my softness through like the posture of my body. And also I would try to really emote it through my eyes. And it was very interesting because obviously, like working in a grocery store, where it's like you have people that are very regular customers. So sometimes it's not so much that you like deeply get to know them, but you kind of get to know them in this way of like you always see each other. You kind of know how they interact with you, how they respond to you, etc. And so there were certain customers I more so would sort of be like, I'm going to like bring this energy and just like kind of see how they respond. Cause they would be my best sort of like data in terms of like what happens when I bring this energy. And what I thought was wild and also like very empowering in a way was I would bring this softness. And maybe it was just like the way I spoke to them, even. Maybe it was the way that I looked at them. And I could instantly see like every time something melted off of them and they became a little bit softer. And sometimes in that softness, it was just kind of like an acknowledgement of it. Sometimes it actually warranted like a more like vulnerable conversation. It was very interesting to kind of watch how like how this enacted something different in the field. And again, like even if it's like I didn't have a conversation with this person that was vulnerable, but there was a softening I saw in them and there was like this acknowledgement between us, that in itself was a deeper connection than the hardness and like the closure that I often would see people coming through within the store, and that even again, like I had walked through most of my life with. And all of this was, part of me coming back to my body and recognizing that, you know, my body was the beholder of so much wisdom and so much knowledge and so much wisdom. And when I was able to be more attuned to my body, able to stay in my body, able to sort of track what was going on and to be able to like move with that as it needed to be, my body started to really bring through wisdom. It started to be a messenger. I started to understand, oh, like when I feel this way, maybe I need to actually leave this situation. Or maybe like when I feel connection to someone or I feel appreciation, because it feels safe for me to actually hold that emotion now and to be connected to that, how can I actually express that to them? And how does that become almost this way of completing the wave? Because we can also have like a lot of buildup of like beautiful things that we haven't expressed. And they can like take a hold of our body just as much as like kind of the heavier negative things as well. And again, like we don't just connect to people through pain, we connect to people through pleasure and joy as well. And sometimes if we're very not used to being in that emotion, it can feel really uncomfortable to then express it to somebody else, which is where it's like, it can be really scary to be like, I like you. I like spending time with you. I want to spend more time with you, or I love you, or whatever it is. And again, like that also then becomes our limited capacity to receive that from another person as well. And all of that becoming limitations to intimacy. But when you're able to stay with your body and you are able to sort of meet your body where it's at and with what it needs, you start to realize the ways that it's communicating to you. And then you get to lead your life from your body. You get to know that when I feel this certain way, like this contraction inside of myself and this fear, maybe I need to speak up, but maybe I need to actually remove myself from the situation. Maybe that's someone that I don't need to spend more time with, instead of sort of forcing yourself in that situation for whatever reason. And again, like staying connected to the grief as much as the joy and being able to ride all those waves, you're not becoming numb to life. You're being in the flow of life. And when we're in our bodies, when we're connected to the natural things that are moving through, we experience more aliveness. And on this kind of more deeper level of that, you start to recognize that, for example, like anxiety and excitement can feel very similar in the body. So much so that it's like we don't even really need to know if it's excitement or anxiety. It's just a sensation. And then even like take it another kind of direction. And it's like, if you're willing to fully feel your grief, your rage, your terror, there's a way that actually starts to make you feel alive. And alive in this way that it's like, it actually feels kind of pleasurable. And you actually are a little like, wow, being in this grief, not ideal, not maybe completely what I desire in some ways, but it's like, actually, it is a gift to be in this grief. And more deeply, it is a gift to know that this is grief, to be able to hold the grief and to be able to work with it. Because when I do, I actually feel more alive. I feel more attuned. And a phrase I often say is that like ceremony can happen in the body. And ceremony to me, we think about ceremony in this very like pomp and circumstance kind of way. And of course, there are ceremonies where it's like we need to adorn ourselves. We need to come up with the most elaborate decorations. It needs to be the most glorious, beautiful thing you've ever experienced, because that is the intention and the presence and the sacredness that this ceremony requires. But at the end of the day, like ceremony to me is really about intention and presence and being with what's in the field. And to realize that your body, in terms of the alchemy, in terms of being with your experience and working with it, in itself is a ceremony, because you're bringing presence, you're bringing intention to it, you're being with what is. It really creates a different level of sacredness of realizing everything is life. Everything that you experience is sacred. Even the things we don't prefer or the things that are uncomfortable or painful have a component of sacredness to them. And, when we chose to be humans, when we chose to come in this reincarnation as a soul, we chose to have that full spectrum experience. But so much of the time, because we're disconnected from the body, we do not know how to hold the more challenging, difficult part of that human spectrum experience, like the spectrum of the human experience. And when we come back to the body, when we can be with it without needing to change it or fix it, when we can actually feel how this thing needs to move through us and be expressed and be witnessed and seen, and maybe it's just by us, but maybe at some point we get to bring that to someone else and they get to witness us and understand us in a different way. All of that brings full-blown aliveness, and that full-blown, full human experience aliveness becomes innately more connection and more intimacy with ourselves, with life itself, with greater energies and powers, and also other human beings of all kind in our life. And so in that way, to just bring a close to this episode, maybe just taking a moment to notice what's alive in your own body after hearing all that. And even if you can't sense a lot in your body right now, noticing that and being grateful for that. And I also want to remind you all, again, coming back to the body, being in relationship to the body is a lifelong journey. Just as nature goes through seasons, so do we. And there are some seasons of our lives where it's really easy to be with our body, and there are other seasons where it's really hard. But knowing how to be in those seasons and having the tools to notice and be with our body is how we walk that journey. And that we come back into relationship with our body, which means we really come back into relationship with ourselves and our truth. And that creates the capacity and the space to then experience that with others and to again experience someone else's body too. Their truth, their sensations, their experience, not in this like codependent, like enmeshed kind of dynamic sort of thing, but just in a witnessing and a curiosity and an openness. I also, to end, just want to invite you to take a moment to even just place your hands on your body. And for whatever your relationship is to your body right here, right now, I'd love to invite you to offer your body a piece of gratitude. Even if it's something just as simple as like, thank you, body, for existing. I don't know you yet, but thank you for existing. I'm grateful that you exist. Beautiful. So thank you again for joining me for this episode, coming back to the series. And I just want to leave you with the invitation of getting curious about, like what is your relationship to your body? And how could you come into a deeper relationship to your body in this season of your life, wherever you're starting? What is just that next step of reconnecting, building a deeper relationship to your body? And I will see you for the next few episodes of this series. But until then, sending you all of my love. Thank you for walking the path with me today. If you're feeling called to go deeper, everything you need is at thesacredintimacytemple.com. Join the community there to stay connected and be the first to know about new episodes, offerings, and what's coming up inside the temple next. And if this episode moves something within you, share it with a friend who's ready. I'll see you in the next episode. Come home to the temple within.